the previous ones, and so the 7th session on engaging users to contribute to the automation program, it's a bit particular in comparison with the previous sessions that we had, part of the Automation Hub Best Practices series. And before starting, I'm gonna just recap a bit, like what was the focus of each session, such that I can maybe trigger the interest to either see again that recording or accessing for the first time. But you'll see that some parts that we presented previously, they might be useful in also understanding what we are proposing as a framework for enabling and engaging with your users while they are contributing in the automation program via the Automation Hub part. But this engagement framework that we're going to basically focus on today will start with an overview and then go through 5 different phases relevant for this framework. And then we're going to close with the Q&A part. Just as a recap, when we thought about this best practices webinar series, we actually wanted to try to address some of the things we heard from the customers or partners, like the most frequent questions we heard from them when either getting started or using Automation Hub, like understanding whether Automation Hub can address some of the needs on the pain points that organizations have, when starting to use the product, whether they can customize parts of the experience such that it's better adapted to the need of the organization. Afterwards, whether, what happens, I'm going to pause a bit just because there's a bit of background noise. So I don't know where it's coming from, but let's see if it's better now. So as I was saying, like sometimes when, you're launching a new solution, you have a bit of activity, then it slows down. And ultimately, like there's a matter of using not just Automation Hub, but maybe interacting with other third-party applications, and you want to, integrate these experiences. How do you do that? So these were the most frequent questions we heard from the customers, and that's how we had in mind this idea of creating a series, which indeed, as Christina said, lasted from July up to today, 1st of November. The entire series was created and supported with the help of my colleagues, Sorin, Teodora, with the help of Maria, our product marketing manager, of course, with the great help from the community team. And the topics that we approached as part of the series, well, we first started in July with talking about how do you get started with using the Automation Hub. And we have proposed a rollout framework, which focuses on understanding first the product, testing it, going through a pilot phase, and then learning from it and iterating on it. And also I touched at that moment a bit on the engagement framework that we're going to deep dive into today. But this was just to set the stage on terms of how to get started and to prepare the future sessions that we continued with. And speaking of that, afterwards, my colleague Sorin talked about large-scale rollouts and focused on the concept of when to leverage multi-tenancy and when to leverage, the role-based access control per category to control the access in the application. How do you do, the management of the users at large scale if you're envisioning onboarding a significant number of your employees into using the Automation Hub? Then we had great insights with the help of Teodora related to building business cases around the opportunities that you identify and you are considering automating, such that you have a consistent way of assessing those opportunities, keeping track of those KPIs, and ultimately making an optimal prioritization of your implementation backlog. So she touched on the customization of the assessment topics, and she showed some really great scenarios around applicability of that capability for defining KPIs and keeping track of the KPIs relevant for the decision-making process. Then we touched a bit on the topic of how do you measure the impact of your automation program? How are you able to forecast that value of the automation program? And this is focusing on the reporting capabilities with a particular focus on the Automation Hub and Insights Cloud integration that exists today, which opens the possibility for the customers, to define the way they want to, measure the value and actually communicate to the relevant stakeholders about this impact. And then we had Sorin continuing the series with a topic around the Open API. As Automation Hub has involved, not only that did we focus on integrating with components from the UiPath platform, but we also invested heavily into supporting this Open API layer such that you could integrate with third-party applications. And particularly on this one, Sorin walked us through some examples of integrating with Slack and Teams just to keep people engaged into what's happening in Automation Hub. How can you collect ideas from external sources? How do you do proper reporting, in BI tools by leveraging, again, the API layer? And 2 weeks ago, we had Sorina and Teodora also showing us how can we go and reconfigure Automation Hub, because as you evolve in the life cycle of an automation program, as an organization evolves, there might be some additional changes that also impact the way you configure Automation Hub, the need to maybe modify the categories, the need to update users based on whether they're leaving or joining a company, changing roles, and as well as maybe your algorithm, for defining KPIs, computing the value of your automation program also suffers some changes as things progress. So we went through these use cases. And now we're closing today with the topic, as I was mentioning, around engaging with your users such that you can scale the automation program. Now, focusing on this engaging topic, we saw in the first session that we had that you can go interact with the Automation Hub, you can understand its capabilities, you can test it with members of your Center of Excellence, some representatives from the business, do a pilot phase, discover some new opportunities, maybe iterate and roll it to several departments, and ultimately, continue to engage with the users and scale the automation program thanks to their contribution. But I always like to say that, Automation Hub is just the means towards achieving your goal, towards, achieving those success goals that you have around your automation program. But what's important is that in order to deliver this mission of connecting the business users, the members of the COE and the IT admins, you need to have like a constant collaboration between them and an efficient one. And this relies on the part where users who are interacting with Automation Hub are, first of all, enabled to understand what role they play in an automation program, what automation is in general, and how can they contribute efficiently and have an impact, but also keeping them engaged into developing this kind of behavior where they come constantly and contribute and ultimately deliver together with the other stakeholders, they deliver results that also have a positive impact on the way they spend their time while working. And that enters into the part with the engagement zone. So this engagement framework that I'm going to walk you through, it has 5 phases, but the way you want to use the information from what you're proposing, it's up to you, because every organization is different. If you're a larger organization, maybe you have dealt with change management over the lifetime of your company, and maybe you already have this roles of change manager. So if you're considering introducing Automation Hub and enabling and engaging your users, maybe you want to leverage the experience that your change managers have, such that you also incorporate this part with, collaborating with your users and engaging them into using Automation Hub. Then there are other means of communication, like internal communications, through which, like newsletter, or you have an intranet, or you have all hands, or there are various means which this information can be also transmitted to your employees, which are impacted by using Automation Hub. And also, if you're having a Center of Excellence, which focuses on RPA, automation more generically, there is a possibility that maybe you have some kind of a program manager in your COE who is also interested, into understanding these tactics for engaging with the users and considering them for scaling the usage of Automation Hub and ultimately scaling the contribution of your users in the automation program. Now, the way the content is being structured, so we are having these various phases. We have the overview, and I'm going to show again the slide and talk a bit on it. But then we're going to take each of those phases around raising awareness, creating the desire, empowering people with the knowledge and giving them the ability to contribute, but also reinforcing the message so that they keep engaged. And for each of these phases, we're going to talk about, what the space is about, what are we trying to achieve, and also give you access to some resources that we think might be relevant, especially for the business users who maybe are not so familiar with the concept of automation and how can they contribute. And ultimately, we have some slides also with additional resources focused on like Automation Hub related, which can be used by the Center of Excellence or can be used by the organizational change management team if needed. Now, talking about the overview again, we think that there are 5 phases through which, you have your users going through as part of the enablement and the engagement phase. And the first one focuses on creating awareness. Whenever you're introducing a new tool, I'm certain that, and you're starting a new program, you need to communicate to your users on why there is a need for something new and why using a specific product. Keep in mind that Automation Hub, it's a product powered by UiPath. So maybe in the variety of tools that you have, in your organization, you need to create this awareness what the Automation Hub is about and why this tool is important, for them and why they should be using it in order to contribute in the automation program. Then, or after you're raising this awareness, we go into a phase of desire where you have to rely a lot on the line managers, the head of departments, the team leads, and over there, you need to understand how can they create desire among their teams to actually contribute and start using Automation Hub, submitting ideas, contributing relevant business-related information, because in this way, they're going to have an impact. And beyond just awareness and desire, there's this phase of knowledge where, of course, Automation Hub is about understanding some capabilities in it and which ones are relevant for your business scenario. But it's also about when contributing, like how do you identify the right input to put over there? How do you identify the right ideas, to put in there? How can they collaborate with the Center of Excellence and the implementation teams such that they stay engaged on the scope of what they're automating, and Automation Hub is the means to achieve this goal together. So in the knowledge phase, we're going to also touch on this part with the training workshops and what we suggest to have in there. Then you have the ability part where you make sure that after you raise the awareness and you created the desire for the people to contribute, they also actually get hands-on experience and they basically train this ability to use Automation Hub as the means towards submitting ideas and contributing with the business knowledge in the implementation program. And last but not least, this is an iterative thing. So knowing that scaling the automation program is something continuous and you want to identify right automation candidates, then you need to reinforce about, the part where what's going well, what can be improved, what are the success stories to celebrate, what was the impact of those users contributing in the automation program, and maybe highlighting that for the capabilities of Automation Hub. Now, taking this first example of raising awareness, usually this is driven by a sponsor. And we've noticed with the experience that the customers had who actually engaged in this kind of idea to both workshops, iterating on having discovery workshops for surfacing opportunities and prioritizing a backlog, that once you had some kind of a sponsor, someone from the senior leadership team that actually, presented why it's important to have an automation program, why it's important to engage directly with the business user, with the employee, to understand the activities that they have and contribute in them. Usually this led to a better adoption of not just Automation Hub, but ultimately translated into a larger pipeline, a more relevant one, a better assessed one, and a better prioritized one, where you have the buy-in from the business, but also you have the buy-in from the technical teams, which are actually implementing that backlog. So having a sponsor to raise this awareness, it's actually a good way of getting early buy-in from your employees, which are directly impacted by Automation Hub. And the questions we're trying to answer is, okay, why are we having an automation program? What is automation? And what role Automation Hub plays in this? There are various ways to communicate, your messages, either through internal announcement, newsletters. You can have an all hands, for instance, to present this concept. Or you can have, like an intranet where this kind of news are being published and they're being used for reference. And usually it takes around 6 weeks, before you officially launch a program at a scale. You should start, already communicating about this need for Automation Hub to be used in order to contribute in the automation program. And in this way, if you're raising awareness, maybe you're avoiding some kind of rumors or misinformation about how are users, supposed to contribute in the automation program and how this is going to have a positive impact on their activity. The users that maybe are most targeted and some resources for them, well, usually we focus on this persona of someone who is leading a team or a direct manager, someone from the business, like a subject matter expert or a process owner who knows, the activities performed in a department. And of course, ultimately, we're trying to transform every employee in the department to become a submitter, contributor into identifying new opportunities to automate. And we have some interesting in here, like some interesting resources that you can use, starting from a product overview, as well as some blog posts that can help in this direction and some success stories. But also for each phase, I'm not going to deep dive and read like the titles of each article. You're going to see this kind of challenges that maybe you're going to face. Like, for instance, when raising this awareness, whether it's about RPA or automation in general, you might encounter this lack of automation awareness and understanding what is the impact of on each stakeholder and how they can contribute in the automation story. So for this, we might recommend, using some PowerPoint decks where you can touch on the topic of top-down, bottom-up approach, depending on what you have as a strategy, when it comes to actually developing an automation program. And then you can have access to some pre-recorded webinars or some podcasts just to set, like the expectations around the way you want to communicate the message. Of course, it's not expected for the entire audience to consume this kind of materials, but it's something that can set the stage into you defining a custom messaging that you want to use as part of the various phases. And there are also some useful links in here around, blog posts that you can use, as well as who are they targeted to. Now, continuing to, I skipped a bit too fast. Continuing towards the second phase of desire, after you have already set the stage and you had a support from a sponsor and they communicated about the importance of the automation program for each person to be a contributor in them via Automation Hub, then it's the part where you also need to gain their hearts into why would I be investing this time into participating into hackathons or discovery workshops or contributing in Automation Hub, and submitting ideas and checking the progress over there. And this part with the desire is usually driven by someone from the Center of Excellence who knows exactly how a solid collaboration with the business users, should look like, but also with the head of the department of manager, because usually they are respected leaders in the teams, and they can become ambassadors for using Automation Hub in the organization. And the main question we're trying to answer when creating desire is, what's in it for each stakeholder who is using Automation Hub? When you're thinking about the COE, it's easy, you're in charge with implementing automations. You want to make sure that you're having the highest impact and that you're scaling the automation program with the help of the business users. If it's a matter of, head of department, manager, you have a team. Some of them maybe are doing some repetitive tasks and you want to get rid of those because, it's not so motivating. So if the entire team is happier, you're happier as a manager. And ultimately for each person in the team is this part where I'm doing some activity, but maybe some parts of my activities can be done in an optimal way, using automation. Or maybe I can contribute to speed up some things, and again, to get rid of some activities which do not excite me and make room for other areas where maybe I feel more motivated, to participate. So the first question is, you need to identify for the various target audiences that you have in your organization, what's in it for them. And this is the question which should always drive your messaging when creating the desire. There are benefits when using Automation Hub, and again, depending on the audience, the benefits might be different, whether you're a member of the COE, might be different, whether you're part of a department like finance or human resources. But ultimately, it's the same message of, we are helping you save time and focus on the activities which are more rewarding than doing the repetitive tasks. And in order to reach this goal, we need your help to contribute. There are various ways to communicate these messages, which is, again, newsletters, announcements, intranets, all hands meetings. And one interesting case about, this part with the desire is actually having some concrete examples that you can use when creating this desire. And if you remember from the first session where I was talking about the rollout framework, I was talking about piloting with one department and measuring the success and learning from that experience. So it is this good idea that maybe you pick one department, one team from your organization, which are a bit more inclined towards, participating in the automation story. And with them, they'll have a session, you're using Automation Hub, you're walking them through the experience of using Automation Hub, and you just identify these 2-3 activities, processes, tasks, which you can submit for Automation Hub, and you can actually see how Automation Hub through its capabilities help you build a case around that opportunity, help you prioritize it. And you can use this experience not only for creating some content that can be shared, in your messaging around creating the desire, but actually can also help you fine tune the way you want to use Automation Hub in your activity. Whether that is like fine tuning the algorithms, defining new KPIs to track, thinking about whether you need the KPIs adapted to the context of each department or not. These kind of questions, you can experiment with as part of this workshop prior to the launch. Again, we are focusing on interacting with users from the business, like direct managers, process owners, and business users doing the day-to-day activities that can be transformed into submitters. And we have some materials that you can use for them, but you also have access to additional materials in here around, again, maybe considering leveraging, explaining what is a bottom-up approach, how the user is empowered to contribute to the automation opportunities, but also talking in general about like what's the life cycle of an automation and when are the moments when they can contribute in there. Most often the problem you're going to encounter is the part where you're going to lack, the employee participation and cooperation. There's this fear that maybe the bots are going to replace the employees. And is this idea of addressing this fears concern early on, such that you can identify those early adopters of Automation Hub that can help you scale a small success story from a pilot phase to a larger audience beyond that pilot phase. You also have in here some videos referenced, and of course, we also encourage you to maybe create, like a newsletter template that you can use, some do-it-yourself videos where those early successes that you created, you can ask actually the users who either have contributed or they are ultimately the consumers, the users of the automation, to talk about how was the experience for them, what did they learn from it, and how the automation ultimately impacted them positively. When talking about the knowledge phase, then in here, again, we are relying to be driven by members of the Center of Excellence and again, the team leads of the direct managers. But we're moving one step closer to actually equipping the users who have access to Automation Hub to actually start using the Automation Hub beyond just, like a pilot phase. And Automation Hub comes with some specifics in terms of how are the users going to access the capability? Are you going to use an Active Directory integration and leverage the user groups? And maybe you can need to do some external communication about them having access to Automation Hub or not. What are the capabilities which they need to focus on? What are you trying to achieve? What would be, like some goals in terms of how much content do we expect to have generated in Automation Hub, and how much time do we expect for the business users to dedicate during the life cycle of each opportunity to collaborate closer with the members of the Center of Excellence. Now, in order to prepare, this knowledge acquiring, we have two phases. The first one in here that I was mentioning, where you're collaborating closer with the team leaders or direct managers to, set the expectations, to set the stage on the real life applicability of our Automation Hub. And in here, maybe connect with them and understand what are the roles that each of these members play in the life cycle of the opportunity. Because maybe you need some idea approvers which sit in the roles of those team leads or direct managers. Maybe you need to rely on those detailed assessment values, where subject matter experts or process owners are going to be asked to contribute because they have the perspective, the end-to-end perspective of an activity performed by the employees. Maybe you'll need to have some ambassadors in each team, which not only have the Automation Hub knowledge, but they're able to become influencers in the team to actually encourage the other users to also contribute as well. And this usually requires some workshops, between the members of the COE, subject matter experts, early adopters, again, to identify, some opportunities, fill them in Automation Hub, walk them through the life cycle, and ultimately transform them into things that are success stories. And this leads us to the second phase of this acquiring knowledge phase, where you're doing trainings and workshops, but they are done, at a larger scale level. Now, whether you want to target one department, 3 departments, all departments in the same time, you also need to take into account that you need to not only create the awareness and create a desire, but you need to make sure that users understand how do they access the product, what are they expected to do over there, what are we defining as an opportunity in terms of size? And ultimately, they start contributing. So this requires some trainings and workshops, how granular they should go, whether you want to actually use more like a discovery workshop. That's up to you to decide what makes sense for your organization and ultimately for what you want to achieve from using Automation Hub. And I'm particularly talking about the size, whether you want to do like a massive rollout or you want to do it in a staggered approach, because some parts of the business are more prone to be like good subjects for automation. And we know the classical scenarios of finance and accounting and human resources, but also you need to connect it with the size of your implementation team. Because as I heard it from customers, identifying new opportunities to automate, it's not the hardest step, and Automation Hub, if you configure that idea collection form, it can be pretty straightforward to do it. But the difficulties rely on identifying actually the good candidates. And this means that you need to have a solid assessment, like a case created on each opportunity. And actually, after you prioritize and you decide that some areas, yes, are good to be automated, delivering that automation, because it's dependent on the capacity that your implementation team has. So if you don't have a big enough implementation team, then you maybe want to, also adapt the rhythm in which you collect opportunities from the business and you engage with them. And a staggered approach might be more efficient. In here, there is a variety of materials that you can use with your team leads, process owners, submitters. In here, I'm focusing from representatives from the business. And we're talking here around academic courses, like the overview one, maybe sections out of it. We have some nice videos about how an idea gets transformed from idea to automation. We have adapted demo videos for Automation Hub targeted by persona, members of the COE, business users, citizen developers, if you're also considering using Automation Hub part of your citizen development program. And we have, of course, like a lot of webinars and articles around how do you surface new opportunities, how do you do process discovery. Then you have access in here to some links related to the public documentation that we have for Automation Hub. And particularly in here, we're talking about, depending who the persona is, you might want to include in your materials things like, how do you get started if you're a regular user? If you're involved in the approval process, again, how do you get started? How do you submit an idea? There are some nice infographics over there that you can use. What is the method for assessing the opportunities? And if you tailor that assessment method, make sure that you communicate the criteria that you're using and how they impact, your decision, to make them transparent towards your users such that they understand the reasoning behind a decision to approve or reject an opportunity for automating. And again, one of the challenges that you're going to encounter is actually this part with a limited automation pipeline that you might have, or not such a good enough one, like a lot of opportunities, but actually, a lot of them might not be suitable for being considered candidates. So you want to adapt, and you want to adapt, the pace in which you're collecting ideas with the part of collecting the relevant information to help with your decision-making process. In this case, you're having, again, access to some PowerPoint decks that you can download from these links, some blog posts that touch on this topic of how do you identify new opportunities, and some videos that maybe certain users might consider exploring before engaging with their members of the department to encourage them to submit ideas. And one of the things I will focus on over here is this part with the hackathons. We had experiences of hackathons which are mainly organized around, building automations. But you might consider extending those to also having maybe a workshop 2 days before this kind of hackathons where you're focusing on discovering opportunities and you're doing it directly in Automation Hub with the help of your business users. Ultimately, after those 2 days, if you have like a pipeline of good candidates to automate, they can be used as a basis for organizing this hackathon with your implementation team or with your citizen developers. Now we're progressing towards the ability part. And in here, what we're thinking about is that once you have gained the knowledge on how to use Automation Hub and you got a bit more familiar with what represents like a suitable candidate for automation, you also want to make sure that users are constantly aware of how can they make progress in the automation program, and if they need any kind of help, how can they obtain the support. So it's about transforming what you actually learned in theory about access or in some kind of preparation workshops into actually contributing and making Automation Hub a day-to-day activity for you. How much time does it take the employees to actually use Automation Hub? How frequently are they expected to actually submit ideas? Afterwards, make it easy for them to discover Automation Hub. Whether you have some kind of a My Applications or an intranet or somewhere they can easily search for a certain tool that you have in the company, make sure that Automation Hub is also linked in there and they get easy access to it. Do not forget also that if you're already leveraging automation in the organization, you're using Assistant, they have a possibility of actually submitting an idea, like having an entry point towards Automation Hub from there as well. Then when it comes to actually identifying the opportunities, make sure that they are aware who are the subject matter experts that can help with better understanding a task or an activity if they're considering submitting an idea for being considered for automation. Of course, things like this, like having access, it's a prerequisite, and if they have questions, maybe you want to consider having 1-2 representatives in each department that can help into unblocking situations where users do not know how to do. In first instance, this can be representatives from the COE, but if you're doing a rollout, at scale, then you need to rely on people from the business to actually provide this guidance when needed. And last but not least, we also recommend, running from time to time a survey just to understand how people actually understand Automation Hub after a certain amount of time and whether they find it valuable. These are some examples of questions that you might want to use, in order to understand the level of awareness, the desire that was created, how much knowledge they have, and how able they feel into using the product, Automation Hub. And of course, something to help you measure the success of this rollout. For instance, awareness about the concept of automation and the impact of automation, desire questions, about understanding whether this is something valuable for their day-to-day activity, and whether, there are ways in which they can free some of their time to focus on the more meaningful experiences. And also whether they are willing to contribute in the program, because ultimately you cannot force someone to do that. Around the knowledge, on one side, it's knowledge about understanding how to identify the right candidates to automate. And maybe leveraging this kind of, we provide an Automation Hub, that default survey about identifying the right opportunities to automate using the UiPath technology. Maybe get a bit of inspiration, and if you see there are some blockers over there about understanding the concept of automation, offering this kind of guiding questions for them to identify which parts of their activity is interested to be considered as part of the automation program. Around the ability questions, whether they find the right balance between allocating time to think about these things to automate, using Automation Hub, helping with answering questions in the assessments to build a business case, collaborating with the team ultimately during the implementation to test the automation and to provide additional feedback, use task capture in order to record the process. These kind of things require time, so it's better to get the pulse from the teams, from the users, on whether they do have time to dedicate for this or not. Whether they are aware of having access to Automation Hub and to the materials needed to support their activity. And of course, to know whether they are aware of, if they submitted any idea, if something they discovered on Automation Hub helped them or not. And if ultimately the automation program has a positive impact on them, and whether Automation Hub contributed in this direction. These are some examples. You can enrich them with whatever makes sense to you, but it's just this idea that maybe on a quarterly basis, you want to be able to share the survey with your users, whether they have used Automation Hub or not, and understand where are they on these questions, such that you can take actions from this. And talking about actions, we're reaching the last phase of reinforcement. And here in the reinforcement part, again, it's usually driven by the leads of the various teams that were onboarded in the automation program and into using Automation Hub. and representatives from the COE, maybe someone like a program manager. And in here, depending on already what were the results after you have engaged with the users, maybe run for pilot phase, scaled it to other departments, you need to go and actually track all this information around how many users went and actually used Automation Hub, connected at least twice, like at least once, sorry, because you have this information around who was an active user. Then you might take a look and get some statistics about who was a contributor in a variety of forms, submitting ideas, or contributing as subject matter experts on an idea by filling in the assessment or adding documentation. This kind of information, might be relevant in order to understand what went good about the automation program and using Automation Hub and what can be improved. It's good to share the success stories, and celebrate those. And there are various ways and you can do that, either by creating a newsletter, leveraging the gamification part, because usually the users which are very active in Automation Hub, they get rewarded for the activity. So I don't know whether you want to rely on the leaderboard or in various ways, but it's this idea of leveraging the gamification part to basically celebrate success and determine ultimately other users to also contribute in Automation Hub. And just make sure that maybe you offer some kind of office hours, where some people who are subject matter experts on Automation Hub, they are available for advice, support, whatever it's needed, and make that one maybe a bi-weekly if you have the time for it. So these are just some examples of reinforcement, but ultimately what you're trying to achieve over there is understand the current usage of Automation Hub, connecting with the representatives from the business and from the COE side as well, to understand, what are the blockers, the bottlenecks that they see from their perspective, and take action from that such that you can iterate and make the engagement of the users better ultimately. And of course, celebrate the success stories, try to replicate them, share the knowledge with the others where in parts of the business that maybe they have not adopted Automation Hub that well. When showcasing success, we have done in the past some templates, that you can use as newsletters, but again, the wording in it depends on you and what you're trying to highlight when communicating to your users, but you might consider this kind of newsletters, do-it-yourself videos where someone shares in short video testimonials, how using Automation Hub and how automation in general helped their activity. And of course, organizing some events, depending on how do you want to celebrate these achievements. Maybe you can share, if you're using some kind of a tool like Slack or Teams, share on a monthly basis, the successes achieved by the Center of Excellence with the help of the business users. And this at first instance creates some awareness. And afterwards, you have other ways of celebrating these milestones. But you want to make sure that, at the beginning, usually there's a hype, and afterwards it slows down. And then how do we ensure a constant growth that also helps, scale the automation program, in the same time also scale the COE team to be able to deliver to that automation program extension, like deliver more automations or collaborate closely with the citizen developers to deliver more automations. And talking about the Center of Excellence, we have summarized in here some links around how to get started with Automation Hub. So, of course, we are encouraging you to understand the part with the platform setup and how to manage users. And in here, we have touched in the first and the second best practices webinar on how to do it if you want some best practices as well. Then you have access to a Get Going guide, which focuses on the various parts of the application and in a certain order that we recommend. And of course, understanding, like the regular paths for submitting ideas, whether it's like bottom up with the help of the employees, top down when it's driven by the Center of Excellence with the help of the citizen developers. All these are links from the public documentation. We have some great videos, as I was saying, about an Automation Hub overview and a demo, like what's in it for the COE. You have in here the links towards the academy trainings where you can maybe selectively choose one or several modules to get inspiration from. And of course, in here, we have referenced the best practices webinar that we had this summer, but as well as an older webinar on how to build and manage your automation pipeline at scale. And some success stories from other customers, that leveraged Automation Hub. Some of them are are focused on the the value given by the customization capabilities or by jointly using Task Capture and Automation Hub to engage with the users. But you'll also find a lot of references on the UiPath website around customers who have successfully used Automation Hub as part of their citizen development program. And you can always stay up to date by checking the UiPath website, where we have the Automation Hub product page, the release notes, and of course, asking for help from the technical support. And last but not least, because I started with that part where I explained about the change management in the organization, and that there are various means through which you actually can engage with your users and think about this engagement framework and how you want to adapt it. In here, there are some useful links, again, like either white papers or some links about certain blogs, where if you have a change manager, you want to consider having them walk through some of them, because they might influence the messaging behind when you're introducing this change management part. And I guess that's about it. I will go back just to the overview slide before in here, progressing towards checking the chat, whether there are questions in there. I seen here there were some things about no audio for me, so I hope that you guys could hear me, because no one stopped me into saying we cannot hear you.
Yes, the sound was okay, Iulia, no worry.
Okay, because for 1 second I thought I spoke like for 35 minutes and no one could hear me and no one interrupted me. So I'm glad that this was cleared. Thank you so much, Christina, for sharing the links to all the sessions. We had questions in the previous webinars asking, like, do we have access to the previous recordings? Yes, you have access to the previous recordings, not only in the way that Christina actually, shared the links, but if you go on the community platform and you look at the past events, you're going to be able to find, just by searching by Automation Hub. If we can elaborate more on the hackathon part, and I think there was, Christina, I think you covered that one. Or yes, if you want to share some thoughts.
You came back to the idea of the hackathon anyway later in the presentation, so you touched on the subject a second time again. And for those who are also interested, like in organizing in-company hackathons, the community team in UiPath can also provide a setup or tools. So we also looking for clients in that and help them organize internal hackathons. So you can contact us at the community@uipath.com. I will share. And actually, I will share my email address. So if you're interested in hackathons, you can write to me and we can see what kind of tools we can make accessible to you to organize internal hackathons. And there is a second question in the chat before we go into Q&A, Iulia, so perhaps we can touch on that. Because this is asked in private. It's regarding the ROI to create value dashboard for executives. So it says like this: these sessions tend to focus on the idea of harvesting and maturing. Does one of the 7 sessions focus on ongoing ROI to create a value dashboard for executives? We have automation for 2 years and we have not leveraged it at Clorox.
Okay, so I will recommend going through this. I'll put again this slide of the session 4, communicating the potential on the automation program. Over there, I talked about the integration between Automation Hub and Insights Cloud, and that integration already provides you access to a set of out-of-the-box dashboards, and also access to a data model, related to the activity and Automation Hub. Depending on how you customize the Automation Hub to redefine the concept of ROI, maybe you leverage the assessment customizations part and you define your KPIs. Basically, you are able to make use of those and create your own dashboards and insights on top of those custom KPIs, or a custom definition of return on investment. On top of that, we actually have in a private preview phase right now, a new extension of that integration where we are combining data from Automation Hub and Orchestrator, and we're trying to provide you perspective around estimated return on investment and actual return on investment that you obtain thanks to the Orchestrator data, and actually comparing those two and enabling you to have a conversation about how much did you promise and how much did you deliver as benefit for your automation program. That's in a private preview phase. You'll have to go in the insider program if you want to register and contribute and test that capability. But when it comes to actually ROI conversation and ROI measurement, our recommendation is first, understand, whether the way we measure or define our return on investment in Automation Hub makes sense for the organization or not. If you decide that you want to adapt it, fine tune it, then consider using the customization of the assessment. And in here in the session 3, my colleague Theodora showed some ways of leveraging these capabilities to adopt, the KPIs to define the way you measure the impact of your automation program. And then ultimately leverage the integration with insights if you want to have an easy access towards those custom KPIs and building, new dashboards that communicate around the concept of ROI, the concept of impact of your automation program. There are alternatives as well. If you don't want to use the insights integration, you can leverage the API layer, like we had in here in the session 5, and use that information in other BI tools if you're not considering using our existing integration with insights. So I hope maybe this explains in what session you'll find the relevant information around the ROI concept. I hope I answered the question addressed in a private channel, because I didn't see an additional one in here in the chat.
No, there is no additional one in the chat. That one was asked directly to me. This is why I passed it on to you. And I was thinking, because this deck will be available tomorrow, I'm going to replace, because the deck will be available in PDF on the links for the sessions, so you'll also be able to pick them up from this deck. I will replace them with QR codes, so it's easier for you to get straight into the session. Yes, if there are any other questions that you would like to ask Iulia, you can unmute now. We have just about 3-4 minutes left, and then we'll prepare for closing. So if anyone wants to unmute and ask a question to Iulia, this is the high time for it. Or you can still ask in the chat if you are shy and don't want to unmute and ask live. You can still ask questions in the chat, no matter whether are resource questions or hackathon questions or anything.
I think I'll take that as no question. Everything is clear. So
yes,
do not forget, Automation Hub is just the means towards achieving your goal. But there are various ways of actually achieving your goals, including the support with the enablement and the engagement of the users, if you're envisioning a large-scale rollout. That's my conclusion for today's session.
Okay, then a big thank you to everyone who was present, and also thank you to Theodora, thank you Sorin, thank you Iulia, of course, for presenting, thank you Diana. Yes, we'll wrap up tomorrow. I noticed some of you wanted also the links in an email. We will send also an email with all the links, but you will also have them in this deck with QR code, so it will be very easy for you to access the sessions from and the content from the sessions from this deck tomorrow. And bye. I hope you enjoyed the series.
Hey, Christina, are you guys going to send out an email with the content series? It was put in the chat earlier. You made a question.
Yeah, so this is what I was saying. I mean, we will send an email with all the links I placed in the chat earlier. The thing is that I don't know whether to send it to the whole database or just to this session, but also when you will have this deck tomorrow, as you can see, Iulia presented a slide for each session. And on that slide for each session, you would have QR code sending you directly to the content. So it will be very easy to pick it up from the deck.
All right, thank you very much.
You will have tomorrow, yes. So on the deck, you have the banner, a snippet from the session, the content agenda from the session, and the QR code. So it will be all indexed and packaged nicely there.
All right, thank you.
Okay. Any other questions? No. Okay. Thank you all for joining. Bye-bye.
Thank you as well. Have a great day, everyone.